like to call it the Supernatural Hour. And now, our hosts.
Hey, welcome to the Supernatural Hour podcast. I'm your host, Raven.
This is Rogue.
This is Doc.
This is Chad.
And we have a new fellow with us tonight. I'll let you introduce yourself.
This is Emmett.
Welcome, Emmett.
Our main topic tonight is a fellow named Don Decker, and it's brought to you by Oteo's Restaurant. There's 2 locations, Linden and Orem, and it's fabulous food. We've actually been there, and you are missing out if you've never eaten there. It's really, really good food. So Don Decker, he is known as the Rain Man, but not Rain Man like the movie Rain Man with, who's that guy?
Dustin Hoffman.
Yes.
Yeah, The Graduate. Yeah.
This guy's not a savant. We'll start there.
Yeah, he's something, but he's not a savant.
Half of an idiot savant?
Yeah, he's the first half of idiot savant.
The thing about him, though, is he's pretty recent. All this went down in 1983.
Yeah. And there's some really interesting information and some YouTube videos about it and an Unsolved Mysteries episode about it. And what I found really fascinating on it was the police activity that was involved with it and policemen that were doing it, very, very credible witnesses to the activity that
Policeman,
happened.
a reverend was there with the law enforcement at the same time.
Yeah, and they're willing to talk about it years later, like with Unsolved Mysteries, and there was a more recent episode with him where they referred back to it and they talked to one of the investigating officers. So very interesting on the provenance of it. The people were there. Yeah,
we listened to 3 of the witnesses, and they all just were sitting. I mean, you could just even feel it in their countenance. They were like, "This is just the craziest thing," and we can't explain it. But I mean, we were there, we saw it. It happened. It wasn't something that he just made up.
All right, we'll find out who Don Decker is and what happened.
So, what did he do?
He went to jail.
And then he got out of jail on furlough.
That's right.
So the story starts, he was in jail for accepting stolen goods.
Yeah, receiving stolen property.
Mm-hmm. So he's in jail, and his grandfather died. And so they let him out on furlough. Hey, you can go out.
Go to the funeral.
And so he got to go and stay with some family friends because they were trustworthy. And he wasn't really a flight risk, and so they weren't worried about letting him out. But
it was interesting, he didn't want to stay with his parents.
Right. What kind of came down was, as part of this whole story, is this grandfather, who they let out to go to his funeral, had actually molested him on a couple different occasions.
Yeah, from the time he was about 7 ongoing.
And he'd also been physically abused as well, yeah.
And so I'm thinking, really? Is he going to the funeral just to make sure he's dead?
Yeah, get out of jail for a few days? I don't know.
I don't know. It's like
verify he's dead. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. And I'm not trying to make light of that, but I'm thinking if someone abused me like that for that many years, I think I'd just be like, just...
Maybe he wanted closure.
I don't know.
It reminds me of the funeral scene in Charade, where Audrey Hepburn's husband is dead and he's in the casket, and there's a group of kind of nefarious people that had worked with him, and one of them, I think it was James Culbert, walks up and he has a needle and he sticks it in him to make sure he's dead.
I remember that.
Double checking.
And then he's like, okay, and then he walks out. It's like, okay, I want to make sure he's dead.
But it kind of sounds like getting ready to go to the funeral, looking for that closure. This evil chapter in his life is ending. Mm-hmm. So here we are.
So the house that this happened in has actually since been knocked down, so it's not there anymore. So he goes to, this home, and it's the first night, and they just said that he just felt that something was just off. And Don, that's his name, Don Decker, went upstairs, to get ready for dinner, and he said, the way he describes it is like a deep chill coming over him. He said he just felt really unusual, just not himself. He felt very disoriented. And then he says he fell into kind of a trance-like state, and he claims that he saw a vision of an older man wearing a crown. And then after this vision went away, he had some scratches on his body, on his arms. And his friends, the friends' last names were the Kiefers, and they were really concerned, with everything going on. And Decker he was talking about the scratches, and he attributed those to Satan.
Right. I'd heard that preceding a lot of this, he was pretty upset by the fact people were glorifying
His grandfather.
Right.
who had abused him.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of really heavy emotion.
Yeah, and that's
that
the reason he
pushed
wouldn't stay
into
with
it.
his parents, because they were the ones that were
Grandpa. What a
talking
great
about
guy
how wonderful he was.
Yeah, and so it's
Yeah,
like,
he had a totally different narrative and just got enraged about the whole thing.
The interesting thing is, you've heard us talk about poltergeists, and we haven't really done an episode on poltergeists specifically, I don't think.
We have, but it's been a ways back.
It was a long time ago. But poltergeists can be contributed to one of two things. There's two lines of thoughts, and I will be very clear which line I think. But a lot of people think that a poltergeist is a noisy ghost. And, here's my Harry Potter reference of the episode, like Peeves from Harry Potter. Going around just being a nuisance, being very noisy, moving things around, throwing things. There's the other train of thought, which a poltergeist is a person that has abilities that they don't know about. And if someone has caused them trauma, especially when they were young, they can manifest their stress and their confusion and their angst.
but subconsciously, right?
Subconsciously.
It's
They
a
don't realize they're
telekinetic
doing it.
manifestation.
Yeah.
And so when I was first read about this, I'm like, oh, totally a poltergeist situation, because that's where I go. I go with that train of thought.
Rather than the
It's-
noisy ghost.
Right.
But he attributed it to Satan right out of the gate, right?
Right.
Because he had the scratches.
Exactly. And it was not long after, like within an hour or two, the Kiefers are sitting in their dining room, and there's water dripping from the ceiling and pouring down the walls.
They said Decker kind of went into a trance-like state. And then the
water came.
The water came. What?
And they thought it was leaky pipes, and so they called their landlord, because they were just renting. So they called their landlord. They say, "Hey, you got to come over here. We've got a problem in the dining room." And I don't know what room it is, but I think it was the dining
I heard it
room,
was the front of the house is what I'd
or the front
heard.
room or dining room. I think I'm saying dining room because the dramatized YouTube video I watched, it was in a dining room.
Ah,
So the landlord comes over, because of course he wants to figure out what's going on and fix the problem so his property's not ruined.
As a former landlord, yeah, having water squirt around in your house is not a good thing. I've had that happen, and I rushed right down.
yeah. You got to go check it out.
Yeah, so he pops over and he walks in and he says, "There's no pipes in this part of the house." He says the pipes are in the back part of the house. And they could not figure out where it's coming from.
What the heck?
And then as they're standing there, the leaks got worse. It didn't just like little leaks. It got worse, and it was raining. And this is when they looked over and noticed that Dawn was in a trance.
And I heard the water initially was coming from the ceiling, and then eventually started coming up through the floor as
And
well.
flying horizontally.
Flying sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah, that usually doesn't happen, and usually not inside.
Right.
The last leaky pipe I saw was not doing that.
And see, one of the police officers, because they called the police at this point, and one of the police officers, when they were interviewing him on the Unsolved Mystery episode, mentioned that. He said, "Here's the water, it's dripping, it's running down the walls, there's like a fine mist everywhere." He says, and then like some mist just formed, just in the middle of the room, formed into a ball, and just shot horizontally across the room. I mean, that was from a very credible eyewitness.
That wouldn't have been my first thought, was like, let's call the police. But I guess I do have a criminal in my house. Maybe you do call the police.
Well, and that was one
So
of the,
this guy that's supposed to be in jail's here, and now there's water coming out from everywhere.
right. That was what my thought too. And when they were
I
interviewing
called a
him,
plumber, probably.
one of the supervisors, told the officer, "Why did they call us for a plumbing problem?"
Right.
So he's right there with you.
But like I said, I mean, at least you could justify it and say, well, I've got this, like, inmate here. Can you look at this water problem I've got?
I used to work dispatch, and people call for the craziest reasons.
I believe it.
I just rolled my eyes a lot.
There are even some interesting YouTube videos on those calls.
Dispatch calls, I'm sure.
Yeah, so the patrolman I was talking about was actually a fellow by the name of Richard Wolbert. He was the first person to arrive on the scene, and he says that he was completely drenched within a few minutes of arriving in the home. And he said, and I'm just going to read the quote. He says, "We were standing just inside the front door and met this droplet of water traveling horizontally. It passed between us and just traveled out into the next room. And unless there's a lot of wind, water doesn't just float through the air horizontally. And I'm no rocket scientist.
Like, the craziness of this story kind of adds credibility to the story, which is kind of weird, right? Usually the more absurd something sounds, you're like, what? This is pretty absurd.
Yeah, and again, who the witnesses are.
Right.
You know, you've got police officers that still to this day go, yeah, it happened. I don't get it.
Right.
Right, so the other officer that was there, his name was John Badgen, and he said, again, I'm just going to read exactly what he said. "I literally had a chill going up my spine, made the hair stand up on your neck. That's how I felt. This was a situation where things were happening I never, ever dreamed could possibly happen, and there was no way of explaining what was going on. They were just at a loss for, we don't even know what to do." So at this point, the Kiefers, who's that's the house that this was happening in, Don Decker, Van Wy, and Van Wy was
he the landlord?
He was the landlord.
Landlord.
And the officers had all witnessed this indoor rain. And then they also had another group of witnesses. One of them was a gal by the name of Pan Scrofano.
Is this when they went to the pizzeria?
Mm-hmm. She owned the pizzeria that was across the street. And then the wife, Romaine Van Wy.
The police suggested that they get out of the house, and I think the landlord didn't want to leave, but pretty much everybody else went to the pizzeria.
All right, so they're like, you know what, it's raining indoors.
Go outside.
Let's go get some pizza.
Let's go out and get some pizza. I heard that the activity stopped after they left, right?
In the house.
Yep.
In the house, yes.
Yep, it says Ron, who was the landlord, noted that as soon as the group left, the house returned to normal. And so...
Did the water just dry up on its own, or did somebody have to mop it up, or...
I don't know.
I didn't see anything on that. I am assuming they had to mop it up.
I would assume. I mean, if you're getting drenched...
As soon as you walk into someone's front room.
But it's a good question, Emmett, because they didn't really cover that at all on the cleanup of that.
I just, as the guy that usually has the mop, it just concerns me.
Dang it.
It would be nice if it just poof went away.
Yeah.
Get out the shop vac.
So, Ron is in his house. He's the landlord. He's, as soon as everyone leaves, the rain stops. However, as soon as they went to the pizzeria and sat down, it started raining in the pizzeria. That was described as rain falling in the restaurant and spreading across the floor. And at this point, the pizzeria owner thought that Decker was possessed. And she claims that she pulled out her crucifix and placed it, around Decker's neck. And she said that he reacted immediately.
Like it was burning.
Like it was burning him. And the crucifix, she said that the crucifix noticeably had burned his flesh. And, it wasn't just him saying, ow. She looked and thought, oh, wow, this is burning him.
Solid demonic possession.
And so she's like, you need to call an exorcist. You got some issues, dude. So they left the pizzeria. And when they left the pizzeria...
Go to the church?
The rain stopped in the pizzeria.
Yes.
Maybe we need to get this man to help cure...
The drought?
The drought.
Send this guy to Ethiopia.
Oh, send this guy to southern Utah. So anyway, they went home. The rain started up again.
The rain went home with them.
Yep, followed him home. And they had some pots and pans around, because when it's first raining and they're thinking it's a pipe that's broken, you put pots and pans around. And they kind of confronted Decker in the kitchen, and then the pots and pans started rattling and knocking around.
They were accusing
noises.
him of causing this on purpose, right?
Uh-huh.
So you're doing this on purpose. And then things got even weirder.
Well, that supports your theory right there. As they enrage him and the activity starts,
Right. Yeah. And so I'm thinking, oh, absolutely. This is a poltergeist kind of thing, with his unknown abilities that are coming out with the stress and
So
the
it's
frustration.
already raining, and now you got pots and pans flying everywhere.
But wait,
There's more?
there's more. I love saying that. I think I might say that every episode. So there's more. So at this point, it's raining. Pots and pans are clanking around with, for no apparent reason.
He's being confronted.
He's being confronted, and then he levitates off the ground and is forcibly pushed against the wall by some unseen force.
There's definitely more.
So we got a lot of stuff going on here. And apparently the levitation and the pots and pans would have been Don Decker, the landlords, and the
People that were renting.
and the tenants.
Yeah, and one of the really interesting things about this whole story is the good documentation. Names,
Right.
dates, times. With so many paranormal stories, we heard from
Right.
that
Second
this
or third
happened,
hand.
second and third accounts. But that's one of the things I really find fascinating about this is, names, dates, times, people, locations.
Right. Well, and it sounds like when this happened again, who did they call again?
Well, I think this is what I think is funny. So
The cops.
So the policemen come back, after the pots and pans, and they missed the first levitation. A little foreshadowing there. And they go back and they said, this has got to be a plumbing issue.
Right, the police chief came. And
Right,
was
and
like,
this is
guys,
this is when he's like, really? They called us for a plumbing issue? Go home. So they went home. The police chief said no, and further investigation is needed. But the two police officers that were there, they returned the next day as a follow up, and they brought friends.
it's becoming like a freak show.
They're like, hey guys, you got to come to this house. Remember the thing we were telling you about last night? Let's go. So
Cops would never do that.
So they went back the next day, to see what was going on, and they thought, okay, it looks like things have settled down. Then one of the new police officers, because they took two new officers by the name of Bill Davies and John Rundle, and John was a lieutenant. They just kind of wanted to experiment, and so Bill Davies took a gold cross and put it in Don Decker's hands. Just said, here, hold this. And Davies recalled that Don Decker stating it was burning him. So Davies took the cross back. And Davies describes the cross as, and this is a quote, it's not hot, but it's hot. And then as soon as that happened, and if you take a metal cross, it's, it might get a little warm, but you have to hold it for a few minutes to get warm. And then as soon as he took the cross back, all these officers, there were 3, saw Don Decker levitate once again and fly into an interior wall, just like he had done the night before, but they missed this part the night before. And the way the Lieutenant Rundle described it, all of a sudden he lifted off the ground and he flew across the room with the force as though a bus had hit him. There were 3 claw marks on the side of his neck which drew blood. I have no answer for it whatsoever. I just draw a blank even today. So these police officers, they were clueless. They had no idea.
Yeah, and they're trained observers. That's what they do. That's their job, is to observe.
Well, and police officers take all sorts of classes. They take classes on everything that that they might possibly run into, so that they can have some answers. And they're trained on drugs and alcohols and gangs and.
But not on rain indoors or levitation.
No, and so they had no clue. So the landlord of this building, he really wanted to help this fellow because he felt bad for him. And it says that he could kind of tell with everything going on that Decker was not doing this intentionally. And so he thought, I've got to get this guy some help. And so they contacted all these preachers. And this happened in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, by the way. And if you watch some of these YouTube commercials or videos, it's
Paya.
Strasbourg Pass.
Strasbourg Paya.
And what was the restaurant they went to?
It wasn't a pizzeria, it was a pizzeria.
It was the Pizzeria, because it was the automated, electronic voice that's reading it.
I love
So
listening
it came
to those.
the
At first we're like, we went where?
Strasbourg Pa at the Pizzeria.
At the Pizzeria.
It's like if Alexa had a traumatic brain injury or something.
Pretty much. Pretty much. There's either a lot of computer-generated YouTubes or there's people that haven't read a stitch in their life, I tell you what. Okay, so read, folks, and then I won't make fun of you on the podcast.
Yeah, well, they're making fun of us on the podcast.
That's right. For trying to pronounce words.
Well, yeah. Have you heard me talk today? Yeah. So I'm the pot calling the kettle black. Sorry. They finally, after calling just a gob of priests, finally got one that would come over.
Both Catholic and Protestant and a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And they finally got an evangelical?
I think so. But they prayed, and they said while they were having this prayer, Decker would have sporadic convulsions. But the longer they prayed, the more peaceful he became, and by the time it was over, Decker appeared to be himself again. And the landlord said it never rained in the house again, and his furlough was over, and so he had to go back to jail.
Don goes back to jail.
Yeah, so I don't know that was necessarily the greatest furlough ever. But as I'm reading this,
Memorable.
Definitely memorable. You're not going to forget that. But as I'm reading this and listening to this, I'm starting to change my mind from poltergeist to possession.
So he goes back to jail. Is what we're at that point.
Yep.
Right.
Back to jail. Weird stuff starts happening at the jail.
At the jail.
So same kind of stuff.
So Dawn gets this kind of thing of, I can control the rain.
I'm the Rain Man.
And so he gets a little cocky. And as soon as he started thinking about it, the ceiling in his cell started dripping water. And so he's thinking, wow, I got the powers. Right? He's thinking it's pretty cool. So there's a prison guard making the rounds, and he's seen water coming out of the cell. And so he's annoyed. And so, he's like, what's going on? And, Dawn's like, I can control the rain with the power of my mind. And, the jailer's like, uh-huh.
Yeah, you got that out of the toilet and threw it around.
He never did this outdoors, did he? I mean, he's really got the power of plumbing leaks. So
Yeah, inside.
It's all inside.
It's indoors.
Yeah,
Right.
In a correctional facility.
Or a pizzeria.
Which
A
seems hard to rig
Pizzeria.
up. It would be at the Pizzeria
At the Pizzeria.
in Strasbourg Park.
Yeah, and so, so the prison guard's razzing him because he's like, no, you're getting water out of the toilet and you're throwing it on the ceiling and you're trying to be all funny, haha. And he said, and he told Decker, he says, if you indeed have these powers to control the rain, and he's being kind of sarcastic, I want you to make it in the warden's office. Make it rain in the warden's office.
Right.
If you think you're so cool, you do this. Well, hell. Basically, he did. The guard went to the warden's office, and the warden at the time was named David Keenhold, and he was actually a temporary warden at the time. And he had no idea of anything that had gone on at the residence or the pizzeria. And the guard enters the office, and the guard's looking around, because he does have this, there's that little bit of a, And he's inspecting the room, and then he saw the warden, and then he just stopped dead, and he told the warden, he says, look at your shirt. And the warden's shirt was soaking wet. And they'd actually interviewed...
Just in the chest. It wasn't like
yeah.
the whole shirt was wet, but there was a wet spot on the front of his shirt. Mm-hmm. A fairly significant wet spot.
Right, and they interviewed him, and they said that he had just been sitting there doing paperwork all day, and there was no reason. I mean, he didn't have a drink that he might have spilled or even leaned up against, to get some condensation.
Yeah, and normally if you sweat, you might get some pit stains, but your sternum is not going to be sweating profusely.
Right. He said it was about the center of his sternum, about 4 inches long and 2 inches wide. He says it was just saturated with water. He says, I was startled, I was scared, and had no idea how it happened. So, so then the prison guard's like, oh, wow, that's creepy. So when when the warden was finally filled in on what had happened over this furlough, he called his friend, who was a reverend by the name of William Blackburn, and said, "You need to come see this fellow." And so he agreed, and he approached Decker's cell, and he had been briefed on everything that had happened, and he actually accused Don Decker of making everything up. And this didn't sit well with Decker.
And his friends.
Right, and the policeman. And his demeanor changed, and his cell suddenly became filled with a strong odor. And the way it was described, I heard it 2 or 3 times on YouTube videos, and I read it on the internet, described the same way. It said it smelled of that like death, but multiplied by 5. And then it rained again. And the Reverend described the misty rain, he called it a misty rain, as the devil's rain.
It's interesting, when you talk about smells, because you see that a lot with possessions too, right? That
Right.
you have malodorous kind of episodes.
Right. The ones that are the most common are the smell of death, a really strong smell of feces, or people will often say they'll have a metallic taste in their mouth, like they've been sucking on pennies.
Yeah, so kind of weird that, nobody mentioned the smell at the house,
No.
right, or at the pizzeria, but all of a sudden the Reverend saying, "Hey, I'm calling BS on this."
Well, and you wonder, did the smell come because the Reverend was there and the Reverend was
Poking?
antagonizing a little bit?
Right, maybe.
So when that happened, Reverend Blackburn said, "You know what? I don't think this is a hoax." And he began praying for Don Decker, and actually sat with him in a cell for hours. And then the rain stopped, and Decker broke down into tears. And whatever it was that had affected Decker has never manifested again. And this is kind of when he talked about to the Reverend about how his grandfather had abused him once, and all he wants is peace now. So, was it a demonic entity? Was it his grandfather causing a lot of troubles?
Or did the negative energy put him at risk for being possessed?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
still don't know, but after reading it and everything, all the research we put into it, I don't think it was a poltergeist.
Yeah, and
encounter.
this happened over several days. This wasn't just a one-night deal, including going back to the jail, after his furlough was over. So it was 3 or 4 days that this happened, and then getting the chaplain or the priest involved there at the end.
Right. And then, as we talked about earlier, on February 10th of 1993, they talked about this in an Unsolved Mysteries episode, which we watched, and I thought it was done very well. This is when they interviewed most of the people that were involved.
Mm-hmm.
But,
And they actually had Don Decker on that talking himself.
yes.
He was talking about it. So were, like you say, a number of the police officers that were involved, and I think the lady from the pizzeria.
Mm-hmm.
It was
And they
very
had,
interesting.
Yeah, and then they had the second Reverend that came to him at the prison. That Reverend said that when he first walked in, he was very meek, a very mild person. And then when the odor came, he instantly changed to just being very dark and very heavy and, very uncharacteristic of the person that walked in.
Was the second Reverend the one that said when it was raining, his Bible did not get wet?
Yes.
Yeah.
See,
Yes.
and that suggests demonic too.
Yes. He, I guess when it started to rain, he pulled out his Bible. I'm glad you mentioned that. I forgot that. He pulled out his Bible and just started reading, and his Bible stayed just dry as a bone.
Right. You start veering away from Poltergeist around the time he thinks he can purposely command this, and then you get the odors, and then you get the
Yeah.
Bible and the cross and all this other stuff.
When I heard the cross burning, and then the smells, and then the Bible staying dry, I was like,
Less poltergeisty.
more
Possession-y.
more possession-y,
Yeah.
more negative spirits involved in here. So just FYI, there wasn't anything that really happened with Don after this.
From a paranormal standpoint.
Exactly, that's where I'm
Don was
going
a
with
busy
that.
man.
No more raining. No more raining, which almost makes you wonder if Grandpa,
May have been involved somehow.
maybe evil Grandpa. However, in 2012,
Oh, Don.
Don burned down a restaurant.
But he was asked to do it.
Oh, and he turned himself in.
He could have put the fire out if he could have made it rain.
Yeah, he's like, I tried so hard, guys. The Reverend took my power.
Lost his mojo.
Yeah, well, they had one of the little, you know, when you pull up YouTube and there's the little teaser pictures, it said like rain and fire.
Except the fire part was a lot more intentional, and like you said, it was a business that he burned down, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he
As a
did it
restaurant.
at the business owner's request, right?
Yeah.
To try to get insurance
Money.
And then I don't know, police just show up and they're like, "Hey, did you burn this down?" And he's like,
Yeah. Yeah, and
Did you use magic powers to do it? No.
Some gasoline and
yeah, there's a
a match.
There's a YouTube on that too, where they talk about when you look up Don Decker, you'll pull it up, and again, this is the 2012, and it's the nightly newscast where they're talking about this fire, and they talk about Don Decker and that, and in that episode or that news interview, they actually go back and talk with Detective Richard Wolfert, you know, and now it's been years later, and he goes, yeah, still can't, you know, yeah, it happened, still can't figure out what went on. But it was very interesting that even like 30 years later, you know, he's still going, almost 40 years later, he's still going, yeah.
The guy's charged with arson, and they're like, and funny thing. About 30 years ago, some crazy stuff happened with this guy.
Right. So in 2013, there's a researcher from New Zealand by the name of Robert Bartholomew, and he set out to try to say that this was a hoax. You know, there's a lot of things we talk about that I think that's a hoax, but I'm pretty sold on this one. I think that it actually happened. But researcher Bartholomew believes the rain was caused by something called ice damming, which is when water becomes trapped under ice on the top of a roof. But when people said, well, what about the levitation, and what about the rain following Don, and what about, you know, the rain in the prison and the pizzeria?
The pizzeria, yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I got nothing.
I've had a home with ice damming, and there's no way that's going to be confused with the paranormal.
It didn't fly up from the floor and
No,
shoot
it just
horizontally.
sat there and dripped in the windowsill.
No horizontal flight.
No, and it probably would have gotten a Bible wet if I'd have put it under there. So.
Good call not to.
Right. No, but just with so many credible witnesses that, like you said, Chad, you know, 40 years later, still are, you know, we can't explain it. And I think this was a real deal.
Yeah, on the news report, they did say, you know, with the 40 years later, they said there's not a lot of the people, you know, that are still around. Part of them, they've just moved on from this realm, but the other is they don't want to talk about it. You know, the detective did. Detective Wilbert did, but you know, a lot of other people, when they contacted them, they didn't want to comment on it. They just said it's dark, and I don't want to bring that back up into my life.
Well, yeah, it happened. They still don't know what caused it, but it happened.
Like, this again, it's been 30 flipping years. Can we stop?
It rained, it got wet, it felt creepy.
Don't know
it's
what
over.
happened. I already told you. Don't know what happened. Thanks.
No, I mean, we've been involved with some creepy things, and I get it. You know, you don't want to dwell there, because if you dwell in those negative feels and the negative emotions, it's going to come up again, and it's best to
Move on.
I mean, when negative stuff happens, deal with it, but you don't need to dwell in the negativity. So I think it's the right thing for them to do.
Well, thanks for listening. Get your Supernatural Hour swag at advancedparanormal.com. Got a whole bunch of interesting things. Mugs, shirts, tapestries. Check it out, advancedparanormal.com.
Also, check out our shop at advancedparanormal.com for our sage sprays, our lavender and sage rollers, all of our personal made items.
Yeah, we moved a lot of those at the Paranormal Festival and the Haunted House. It's popular.
Bestseller.
Get
All
them
right.
for Christmas gifts.
Ho, ho, ho. Who doesn't want to find some sage spray in their stocking?
What about YouTube and TikTok?
No, we don't care about that.
Oh,
I'm kidding.
I care very much about YouTube and TikTok.
what's your TikTok count up to?
You know, I haven't looked at it for a couple of days. But I'm going to put ghost apples on so that everyone can see the ghost apples.
Oh, that'll help.
And then I will look. But the last time I looked, which was about 4 days ago, we had 1,627.
That's great. And our YouTube subscribers, thank you for subscribing. We're getting some additional subscriptions there. If you haven't subscribed, go out and look at it. We do add some of the additional images on our YouTube channel that you won't see just on the podcast. Things like ghost apples and those things, so you can kind of watch some of the things. A lot of it's kind of stock wisps and advanced paranormal photos, but we will, when we talk about specific things, we try to pull in photos that are specific to the information that we're talking about.
We put some stuff up on our Facebook page, but there's some stuff that are TikTok exclusives, mostly because it's easier.
But we appreciate that. Also, become a patron. There's some benefits with that. If you go out, you can get
my awesome clip art.
Her clip art. We're going to get new.
That's worth the price of admission right there.
Yeah, the new newsletter.
Clip art newsletter.
All of our patrons get.
And in the newsletter, you get to know what we're going to be podcasting about the entire quarter.
And we just found that out.
Yes, you did.
We've got different levels of patrons, $5 digital, and they go up with different benefits. So one of the benefits is our summer party that every patron is able to attend. So that was a great time this last summer.
And you get bonus podcasts.
Yep. Like you need them. No, like you need them.
There you go. That's better.
All right.
Stay spooky, my haunty friends.
Love you, Nicholas.
Have a good one.
Hey, good night.
Good night.
You've been listening to the Supernatural Hour at AdvancedParanormal.com. The Supernatural Hour is part of the Radio Ronin network found at RadioRonin.com. Copyright 2021 by Advanced Paranormal Services.